Okay, hello, and this week I have got a privilege of speaking to someone new, and frankly, somebody who reached out to me as kind of a fan of the podcast and told me a little bit about his work, and it blew me away. And so I immediately said, let's get you on the horn, and here we are. His name's Michael Wall. And I am not even going to reveal anything. I want him to do the revealing. So with that, let's say hello to Michael. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Hey, Darwin, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's a real honor and a surprise, like you were saying. It's a real exciting surprise for me.
Well, great. I appreciate that. So why don't we start off by having you talk a little bit about your work. You expressed a little of it to me in our initial conversations. I've done a little more digging, but I would like you to kind of tell your story.
Sure. Well, to just set the stage, what I'm doing currently is I'm a composer and I'm a multi-instrumentalist, so I'm a performer, and I'm on faculty at the University of Utah in the School of Dance. And then I also run a small company, a music distribution company called Sound for Movement that focuses on music for dance educators and students. Let's see, there's so much more that is going on, but I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information at first. So,
oh, but I think that you should in fact overwhelm us with information. That's
okay.
kind of why we all listen, man. So let's have it.
Okay, well, so I'm faculty in the School of Dance, right? Which is a weird thing. So usually when I tell anybody that, they're like, "Oh, whoa, but you said you're a composer, so you also dance." And I'm one of these weird kind of, well, not, weird at times, but niche musicians that have dedicated my life to making music for dance. So I play class, so I'm the person that, most folks know ballet pianists that sit in the corner and play classical music. So I improvise all. I don't really play classical music. I instead play like Radiohead and Tom Waits in the style of classical music. I do that a couple of days a week here at the U, and then I play Ableton Live and trumpet and piano for modern dance classes. And then I teach here at the U, I teach sound design to musicians and dancers and poets and artists and all this. And then I teach 3 or 4 other courses for the freshmen, the sophomore and juniors here. And I've most recently collaborated with Ableton to change all of their curriculum to be taught through live. So we graduate about 30 to 40 women, primarily from the program, the undergraduate program every year, and they're all coming out as badass sound designers and music producers. And I've done that for many years. I've composed for dance companies for the last 25 years. My primary thing now is I handle not as many, maybe like 25 to 50 commissions a year, which is not as much as I used to do in my younger years when I wasn't a dad and a husband, where I used to handle somewhere between 200 and 300 commissions a year for dance companies all over the world. And I've made it my goal. I came up with this, we're both composers. And so it's the idea of creating parameters for yourself. And
right.
Many years ago, I came up with a parameter for myself that was kind of how I think of myself as a musician is during a dance class is I'm really just a creative metronome, right? So I have to keep but I have to make it pleasant to listen to, and I have to make it motivating and exciting or sad or any type of environment. So when I started distributing music online, I was like, whoa, how am I going to organize this library? It got chaotic very, very quickly. And then I was like, well, what if there's a few time signatures that are meters that are primary to dance, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. Those are the time signatures that are prominent in most modern dance techniques.
Right.
So I decided to go through, and the parameter I set for myself years ago was, I'm going to see if I can make one track in all of those time signatures at every BPM from 20 BPM to 200 BPM. And I'm about a third of the way there. It's about 900 and something pieces, and I'm around like 450 that are up on Spotify right now and on my website.
That's unbelievable. But also, the idea of parameters is to reduce the number of options that you have, not increase them. You get that part of it, right?
Well, we have, you sit down to make anything and record something. And I think that's the thing that a lot of folks struggle with. I mean, one of my favorite books right now, and the book I give to a lot of students, is Dennis DeSantis's book, The
74 Strategies, yeah.
Exactly, right? And I love how he starts that. It's like, okay, what to do to start, what to do in the middle, and what to do to end, right? And it seems so simple the way that book is structured. I think a lot of folks do struggle with that beginning. I run the Ableton user group here in Salt Lake City, and we've spent the last year just focusing on starting things. Mm-hmm. And so when I go to sit down to start, I mean, like I said, I'm a dad. I don't have a ton of time, right? I don't get to wait for the muse to just come and and visit me. I have to get going. I usually have like 45 minutes to an hour in these small little pockets of time. And so it's not hard for me to start because I can just look at what I've done already and see where the holes are and say, 7/4 is looking a little light right now. Let's make a whole album in 7. So
interesting. Well, now, the thing is, you talk about not having time because you're a dad, but frankly, you said that at one point you were doing 200 or 300 commissions a year. That didn't leave you much time either. What is sort of the process you go through to be able to compose and produce music at that kind of clip?
I'm not sure. Have you ever been in a dance class? Have you? I know you've worked
Yes.
a little bit with dance. Have you ever played class before?
I've never played class, no.
We share a common thing too. I was trained as a jazz musician.
Oh, okay.
So I studied jazz piano with Kenny Barron when I was younger over at Rutgers University.
Okay.
And you're a good jazz guitarist as well, right?
Well, I used to be.
Come on, man. I had so many questions about that.
I'm a guy who likes the look of a jazz guitar at this point, but yeah.
But, I mean, one of the things that attracted me right away to playing for dance classes was to get from the dining hall over to the practice rooms at Rutgers University. You had to go through the dance studios, the hall where all the studios were connected. Mm-hmm. And I remember walking by and seeing all these beautiful men and women moving in these incredible ways. I come from an incredibly tough background from Mississippi and New Jersey, and none of my family members are artists whatsoever. So seeing modern dance was like, I don't know, like I've never taken acid before, but I imagine it's similar to taking acid, seeing just these visual things that you had never imagined before. Mm-hmm. And I remember walking by one day and seeing all this beautiful movement and hearing like 20 musicians playing. And I just was drawn to the music. And I poked my head in, and it was one guy playing like 10 instruments at the same time. And I don't know what it was, but I knew I wanted to do that. Right. He was improvising. He was playing he was managing lots of different content at the same time. And that was so intriguing and so exciting for me. He ended up becoming one of my teachers. His name's Robert Benford. People that know him, he goes by Tigger. He's one of the real old school guys in this, one of these guys that are musicians for dance. So what I learned from playing class, I started playing class, and what I learned is that it was really improvising. It was the improvising I was missing from jazz. In a lot of ways, jazz feels like such a formalized improvisational structure, know, and as I got more and more experimental, I found that I was like not really enjoying myself as a jazz musician. And so playing class, you're improvising, I lived in New York for many years, and there were days where I would play, 5 classes a day, weeks I would play 5 classes a day, 7 days a week, And if you think about that, right, that's 2 hours of music for each of those classes that you're improvising. So I would be playing 8 to 10 hours a day, and I did this for maybe 5 years straight at that maximum clip. Now I'm a faculty member, right? I only have to play class 1 day a week, but it's or one class a day, so it's not so bad. But even in that 2 hours, I have college students that I see from freshman to senior year. I've got to keep that music interesting.
Mm-hmm.
They have to. I mean, when was the last time you sat down? Well, I'm asking you, and I know that you listen to a ton of different things. But I mean, even someone like yourself that's listens to a lot of music. When was the last time that you sat down and listened to one musician's music for 2 hours straight?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. It seems like the pressure to not just have people falling off their seats is got to be huge, right?
So it's like going to the gym for composers. That's how that's my elevator pitch, right? Like
Right.
that's the short thing for folks that aren't in the dance world because I'm friends with lots of musicians, but not a lot of them know what I do.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really get it until I bring them into the classroom and they're like, "Whoa, you do this every day?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? This is a light schedule compared to where I
What it
used
used
to."
to be, yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
can't
And so
imagine like these 10-hour a day things of like you must have gotten chops like crazy.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's it. I mean, you think about playing, and the cool thing about it, Darwin, is that you have instant feedback,
Right,
right?
right.
If you play something that doesn't sound great, you can tell because the people in the room,
Stop
it's
moving.
not hard to tell. It's not a mystery. There's no I mean, when we talk about like the deep levels of like Gaga technique, the Israeli modern dance that's happening now, that's sweeping the modern dance field. That type of really, really high art and that sensitivity that has to be between the musician and the teacher that's developed over years and years. There's a very, very high nuanced telepathy that happens, right? And care and love and kindness and open-heartedness that happens in this creative well that just spills out in those relationships. But on the surface, if you're playing something that doesn't work, you can tell. And even to this day, like I'll try some new things and it won't work. And the teacher just looks at me. I'm like, I know, my bad. I know. I'll try something different. So it's instant feedback as a composer for your music.
Wow, that sounds amazing. You've mentioned to me that you're a listener to podcasts. So you know that one of the kind of things I'm into is learning more about people's background. You dropped a little nugget that you
Right.
kind of come from a pretty rough and not particularly musical background. Why don't you give me a hint or a little more information about what that means and where you're coming from and how it got you to the point not only of being this wellspring of music for the dance community, but also one that feels super comfortable bringing technology into the mix and being a instructor at that level as well.
Sure. I was born in the Mississippi Delta. So both of my parents, I was born in a small place called Sunflower, Mississippi, which a lot of people don't know. The only thing it's famous for is Parchment Prison. And so both of my parents were in maximum security prison when I was born. So I actually don't know exactly where I was the first few years. But eventually I came back to my mom and dad, and we moved from Mississippi to Florida. So I have these roots in the deep South, in the Baptist church. And
Mm-hmm.
the few memories I have are of the power of spiritual music, right? Not so much religious music, but the spiritual side of music, how it can move people to speak in tongues or to just cry, right? I mean, I live in Salt Lake City now, and the first time I heard the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, I was just, I mean, it's 350 people singing at you. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you can't help but just weep
Right.
around that much humanity. And, I want to give you this real range for a reason to tell you, that far back. I've thought about this question a little bit. And then we moved to New Jersey, and I grew up a skater and listened to a lot of 411 and Carcass, and was a big fan of. I'm in my early 40s, so I saw MTV come alive,
Mm-hmm.
and that was
Right.
amazing. I was really amazed by music videos and all of this, but I was the skater that was also listening to Dizzy Gillespie. which was weird, right? So like I was the punk that was like, yeah, I'm into straight edge, yeah, I'm into all these things, but I was also listening to Horowitz play Chopin and Miles Davis and transcribing Miles Davis solos and orchestrating them for my high school band. And those band directors, so I was a trumpet player first through elementary school and middle school and high school. And those band directors, it's just luck, right? Life is so much about luck. And then that luck, being able to see the opportunity in those lucky moments and really try to seize those opportunities. And I just had such great band directors that became surrogate parents that saw the type of struggles I was living in and just pointed me to the right people. And so my high school band director, he gave me way too much content and let me get out of classes to be able to study arrangement, and then he introduced me to this summer program that ended up getting me in touch with Rutgers University. And at this one person that I learned from during a summer program paid for my registration to Rutgers University and said, yeah, you'll love Rutgers University. I'm like, great. But a year before I went to college, I busted my embouchure. I was the little 4-foot dude that could scream louder than any other football team's trumpet player, right? So I was friends with all the football players because I could always play louder and scream, play higher than all the other. But I was tiny. I was 4 foot. It was hilarious. But because of marching around at Giant Stadium in November, my embouchure just busted, and the embouchure is the muscles. If you don't know, it's the muscles around your mouth that are really the instrument behind the trumpet. Your lips buzzing are the instrument behind the trumpet. Mm-hmm. Everything else is just an amplifier, and a resonator. Right. Yep. So I couldn't play a year before going to college. My theory was solid. All this stuff was solid, but I had no instrument. So I quickly learned piano and kind of lied. Oh my gosh. I've since told Kenny about this, but I lied and said, oh yeah, I've been playing piano for years. And I came in and I knew 3 songs, and luckily they didn't ask me to play anything else because I could barely play the piano. I'd only been playing for a year. And I got in, and then that summer I really shed really hard, but I got a record of Kenny's Wanton Spirit, and I was like, dear Lord, what did I do to myself? This guy's an amazing guy. But the lessons with Kenny were 2 pianos in a room. Mm-hmm. And he's a soft and gentle man, and he saw in me something, and we grew together. He took me from not knowing really anything to, my senior year, my last lesson. He said, hey, why don't you come be on my next album? And to me, that just bowled me over. I mean, it was just incredible. But during Rutgers University, I mentioned that time where I saw that dance class, and I began playing ballet classes, intro ballet classes, and learned how to play dance classes over a few years. And I was putting myself through school by playing trumpet at the horse racing track in New Jersey. I was a bugler, a professional bugler. And I'd play at Meadowlands and Monmouth Raceway Park. So I'd do school and then leave at 7 o'clock at night and do 13 races down in North Jersey.
I mean, are you literally talking about the da 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 kind of a thing?
Yeah, man, which is one of the hardest things to play on trumpet. So I had this injury, right? And so then I read the book Zen in the Art of Archery, and I just learned, I used that one thing on trumpet to heal my embouchure. Uh-huh. So I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to play trumpet in college, but I just used that incredibly difficult thing to play on the horn. I mean, ask any trumpet player and they'll say the 2 toughest gigs, right? Besides playing the beginning of a Mahler symphony where the trumpet sticks out like a sore thumb, right? Is taps.
I was going to say taps is. I've heard people say that before. Taps is terrifying
because it's all open valve, and taps is really hard. I recently played it for my wife's grandfather for his funeral next to 2 Marines, right? Mm. And so I'm playing it, and you're just hoping, please not today. please, not today. Don't crack the note today. Like, please, I'll do whatever you need,
Right,
God. I'm not even
right.
a religious person, but like, please, just not today. But, that's one of the toughest things, to play just because it's all open horn, right? But I taught myself, how to heal myself and heal my embouchure to where now I can play horn again, which is really, really great. But that's how I put myself through school. But the late nights were crushing me because I had to catch up to everyone else that was there in college, right?
Hmm.
So I want to give you this range specifically because I knew lots of talented people at university that are either dead now or don't play music, and I wasn't talented. Right? I don't ever feel like I'm a talented musician, but I am someone who works really, really hard. And I recently read this book by Josh Waitzkin, who is a chess player. It's called The Art of Learning. I highly recommend this book. And he talks about this phenomenon of how folks that have to really work hard for something and see a lot of challenge throughout their life are more likely to see success in the end because of the effort they've had to put into it. And so, at this point, like I have so much gratitude and for the life that's been unfolded because I have, although it's a weird life playing music for dance, I do have a career. I make my living as a musician. I've only had one other job in my life outside of music. And that was just a false sense of pride, one of those times where, oh, art's going to stay pure. I'm not going to make any money off of art. And I went and waited tables and I was terrible at it. And commissions were coming in and they were paying a lot more than waiting tables. But, to get to the technology side, it really is me. I'm one of those guys that saw iTunes come about and be like, how could I do that? I got one of the first iMacs, and now I have this screaming iMac with 64 gigs of RAM on it. But at one of the first ones was that Bondi blue one. I had that
Right.
one. And
Yeah.
right away put, some software on there and started capturing stuff. And I'd always been into recording. And I've studied in analog recording studios and apprenticed on tape machines. But the ability to do everything myself, I loved going to the recording studio. But as you know, working with dance commissions, the budgets are low until you get to this one strata that only very few people get to, and there's not a lot of work up there. I knew I wanted to make a living at this, so I had to figure out a way to take the $500 commissions or the $100 commissions, and every once in a while the $5,000 commissions come around. For the most part, you're doing $200, $500 commissions or
Hmm.
$200 commissions. That add up pretty good. And I knew I had to teach myself digital recording. So I did that. And then after a while, there's dancers are so smart, right? They're so good spatially and they know music way more and in such a deeper way than musicians that as I started teaching dancers, the students' eyes would just glaze over when I would start talking about music theory or rhythmic theory. And it's like, man, I got to get these guys doing things, That's where dancers really learn is by doing. And so I just slowly started trying to figure out how I could put the technology in their hands. And as I was mentioning, our brand manager for Salt Lake City is my buddy Serafin Sanchez. And we talked about it for a long time. And came up with all these interesting ways of figuring it out and all these license education deals. But my boss here at the University of Utah, he was saying, you want to send them off with software that they know how to use and that they own.
Right.
When I said that, Serafin said, well, do you think you could learn how to teach them at a high level just using Live Intro? And I said, sure. I've been using GarageBand and using third-party plugins for years. I can 100% teach them whatever they need to know on Live Intro. Like, how can we figure this out? And I realized that it was as inexpensive as a textbook. He was able to work out this really nice coupon for a discount for some of the students, and now I've redone all of their curriculum, and I tell you, Darwin, the music that they make, the main thing dancers look for and choreographers look for is new. They've always looked for new. New music means that there's new environments that new movement can live in. That's so important. And if they don't have that, they'd rather dance in silence. And even that has become old hat at this point. Dancing in silence. There's nothing unique about that, right? But so there was a time where when I was at Rutgers 20 years ago, the dancers would learn how to do sound design projects on reel-to-reel tape. And no offense to Apple, but I mean, GarageBand really killed that way of teaching dancers because it's meant to be genre oriented, right?
Right, right.
Dance has no limitations with genre. There's no trying to imitate any type of genre. They need new. They can live in any genre, right? Which is really fun as a composer. Sometimes I'm doing dubstep one day. The next day I'm doing something that sounds like Max Richter. The next thing I'm doing something that sounds, like Caterina Barbieri and then the next day I'm playing something that sounds like Chopin. I mean, the range of stuff, they embrace genre, but they really seek it out to move their art form forward. They really need to move music forward. So I said, we should put these tools in their hands and just let all of the curriculum come through them making music and making their own music for their own screen dances and for their choreography.
Mm-hmm. That's really fascinating. Now, you talk about how their eyes glaze over in having to sit down and learn music theory. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I'll never forget the first time when I was just getting introduced to working with dancers. I was I went to them and I was like, as musicians, we have different ways of documenting our work. How do you document the work? Is there some documentation I could look at to understand the work that you're doing? And they looked at me like I had just fallen off the turnip truck, right? They were like, well, there's people who have theorized the idea of a written language for dance, but no, we learn it together. We memorize things. We memorize the movement and the feel of the things that we need to memorize. We also understand the space, and they started talking about all these relationships. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, this is something completely unlike what I imagined it to be. I would think that them coming into music would be an almost similar thing, which is like music sort of has these implicit strictures that say, you have to be in a key, or you have to have a rhythm, or you have to whatever. How much of that stuff do you feel like you have to teach them, and how much do you allow them to intuit on their own and through their own experimentation?
Well, that's a fantastic question, right? Each of us that work in universities, we're this very, very small crew of people. There's maybe 50 of us in the United States, and only a smattering of them of these types of educators and musicians for dance like myself. We're a very small group of people, and everyone has some different, they have different approaches to how to deal with this. Because I'm at a large Research One university, there's a lot of support for music education here, which is not true for every dance program across the United States in higher education. Mm-hmm. So I have this luxury of having them for 3 years, right? Some folks will have 2 weeks with dancers to just do a quick overview, right? But so if someone's meeting me for the first time, the one sentence thing I say is that I'm the type of person that I'm the person that's responsible for teaching them what they need to know musically to have a career in dance, right? Mm-hmm. And the nuance idea of that is that I'm bridging those two worlds of music and dance, right? And what I have to look at is, and why I still play class now. A lot of folks that get working in higher education, they stop playing class, but I need to stay connected to what teachers are doing, right? Mm-hmm. For my own personal work, but then also to see what the students respond to. But also seeing what choreographers are doing out there, what those choreographers are responding to. And in that, then the type of music that I'm getting asked to write the most Those are things that I try to focus on from year to year, and it fluctuates, right? Which is so great. Every year I don't have to teach, okay, here's a C major scale, and I don't get
Right.
that burnout from university. I get to be like, okay, you guys, you've been really interested in working with Ableton Live. So guess what? You're all buying it, and we're going to learn it in 3 weeks, and then you have 3 projects due in 2 months, and they just stand there looking at it, and they're like, "But we're not musicians," and I'm
Right.
like, "But you are so much, right?" If you think about all the different art forms, dance supports music more than any other art form supports any other art form.
Right. Yeah, that's a
You
great point.
know,
Right.
I mean, both financially, but also in a way of moving it forward.
Hmm.
So it's old hat to dance without music, right? But dancers, the choreographers, they live on that new music. So they live with music their whole lives. So they understand music at such a core level that really all you have to do is say, oh, that thing that you're calling speed, we use the word tempo, and how we measure that is in BPM. And they're like, oh, okay, so 7/4 is faster than 4/4. No, well, how we organize space is in this thing. So when you're counting in this way and you're doing swings, you're doing them in three because of this odd thing. And if you did them in four, it would be a little bit more square. So it fits more in a 6/8. And you're just, in a way, what I'm doing, what my goal is no shaming,
Right.
right?
Right.
No shaming. It's such a hard thing to teach a different discipline in a different discipline, right? It's a very difficult thing because you don't want to make them feel like idiots. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
Because they actually know so much. It's more about just putting labels on the things they already know, and then just kind of, especially with the software, they're like, okay, where's the button that allows me to flip this thing backwards, and then where's the other button that allows me to drop it 4 octaves. It's
Hmm.
like, good, use the word octave, that's really, really cool. It's right here, which things like GarageBand, because it's so genre oriented,
Right.
what genre except the worlds we roll in need to flip music backwards and turn it, and drop it
Right.
four
Right.
octaves, right? This is what they want to be able to do. Hopefully that answers your questions. I mean, I feel like we could talk about so much stuff. I'm trying to stay focused.
Well, it's interesting though that you talk about dance as being a thing that moves music forward. I think it shouldn't be a total surprise that things like all of the forward movement that came from John Cage, for example, was really very tightly integrated with his work with dance
Yeah.
companies and dance people. But there's a long history of that happening. And so my question is, do you ever feel like by introducing the dancers to music creation on their own, that you're maybe preventing them from exploring a direct interaction with composers, or do you think of it just as an opportunity to learn what the mechanism is like?
Gosh, what a great question. So, yeah, I mean, you talked about John Cage, right? So
Hmm.
his life partner and artistic partner was Merce Cunningham. I mean, both of those two changed art in such a dramatic way,
Right,
right?
right.
And why that intimacy? I mean, the literal intimacy that they had, that they shared their lives together, but just that intimacy, that dedication to each other, that free flowing ideas that they both. You didn't know what piece of music you were going to play each night for the Cunningham Company. You didn't know, the dancers didn't know what roles they were going to be dancing. They had to
Hmm.
know all of the roles. They didn't know what pieces they were going to be dancing. Everything was decided by the whole gaggle of them rolling the I Ching backstage before going on that night. It's an amazing thing, right? And so I've known so many choreographers that, to answer the first part of your question, have way better record collections than anybody that I've ever met,
Hmm.
musician, librarian that I've ever, anything, right? Audiophiles, right? They also, when you work with them, I always ask dancers and choreographers, hey, before I start this commission, not that we're going to copy anything that you've been listening to recently, but why don't you just give me 10 things or 5 things on a Spotify playlist that you're listening to recently? And I tell you what, like, I usually know one of them,
Yeah,
right? Because
right.
they're on this hunt, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then, I do that with my students too. One, because as you like to say, I'm old as dirt, right? I feel old as dirt now because I'm twice as old. When you hit the point when you're freshmen, when you're twice as old as them, you're like, I better start coming to terms with
Yeah,
this fact
right.
that I'm old. And I better start asking them what music is important to them.
Yeah.
Like what's important to them. And Darwin, it's rarely anything that I know. I have a responsibility to introduce them to weird stuff like Caterina Barbieri, or to
Hmm.
tell them about things like microtonal music and why it's important, why Harry Parch is so important, why he's one of the few folks that thought about making new instruments so we're not all tied to Pythagoras and this white man from years ago that's controlled Western music. For like, we have to have those philosophical conversations, but at the end of the day, they are always seeking new stuff. And when you give them something, right? When you give them something, like I said, they want to know, how can I stretch this out? So, what's so funny is when Paul Stretch for Mac came out,
Hmm.
this like
Yeah.
granulizing,
Yes.
it's free, right? So that was one of the workarounds to stretching stuff out. Oh my gosh, the stuff these guys stretched out, man. I mean, it was like you'd come back and the student would be tired, like they would look wrecked, like they've been partying all weekend. They're like, I put everything that I love through Paul Stretch, and I'm like, right on, high, and then like, go home and get some sleep. You did the
He
Lord's
did the right.
work.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
you
right.
did good work over the weekend. It's, but now, like, they know what they want, but they don't know necessarily like exactly how to say it. And so if I'm allowing them to use the tools that we are using, then that's allowing them to be able to communicate to musicians in a more effective language. If they can talk about a delay plugin and say, the reverb tail on that, it's lasting just a little bit too long. How about you take the pre-delay off and like add a little filter because it's getting a little bit. My students can talk like that,
Uh-huh.
or
Wow.
like this type of way of communicating with musicians, it just moves the collaboration process forward, and makes it easier. But, what happens out of that is just the art forms on both sides are served and pushed better. Imagine what these women are going to be doing in 10 years
Yeah,
where the
right.
art
Exactly.
will be.
You had mentioned that, it's Ableton Live that you use as sort of the platform. And in the email to me, you kind of talked about how it's sort of the simpler sample engine that becomes
Yeah.
kind of a sound design tool of choice. But I'm curious, what do you introduce them to as like source material? Do you talk to them about things like field recording? Do you open up the door to like freesound.org? Do you say, hey, stream stuff off of Spotify, capture it? And what are the things that you find are like fertile source material for them? Because my suspicion is with this constant hunt for the new, that they're almost as interested in finding unique source material as ways to process it.
One of my favorite interviews of yours was with Richard Devine, right?
Hmm.
And so if you can just imagine like all of these Richard Devines going around with their iPhones, right? Just capturing stuff. That's what my classes look like in the evening time, when they're going to get stuff. But you got to think about like what did they need, right? There's 4 things that they need. So the 4 things they need is they need an instrument that sustains, that has pitch. Then they need an instrument that sustains and has no pitch. Then they need an instrument that has articulation, so that has a decay,
Hmm.
right? And very short release, right? I don't use any of those words. I just say that has articulation and has pitch. And then they need something that has articulation and has no pitch. And they have to make one instrument. They have to build one thing. Like for the like freshman, sophomore, junior classes for undergraduate level, we do just like 1 or 2 of those. For the sound design class, for the class that has musician and dancers, lots of them very new to live, which is an interesting thing, having musicians that are very experienced in live and having a dancer come in who's new to live. And by the end of it, the dancer, like the musician's sitting there with their mouth open, like, how will I ever be able to feel that free?
Right. Right.
Positions, so it's giving them those limitations that have nothing to do with music theory or any type of synthesis or anything. It's just go make something that does this. And they're like, cool, got it. And then I teach them how to tune the instruments. Eventually we get into some more in-depth stuff. But what I do after I tell them and give them that first initial assignment, what I do is I have them sing a song that they all know, like Happy Birthday, right? And I record it right there in the moment. And I open up live and I say, listen, you don't have to know what I'm doing. It's okay. It's going to be a little scary. It's going to look weird. But don't worry about it. This program, it uses a lot of the same keystrokes as Microsoft Word. You can copy, paste, cut, duplicate. It's going to be fine. Save as, all of it's going to be fine. And I show them right away how I can make a piece just from Happy Birthday and an instrument from, their voices in 5 minutes. I have all this dance video on my computer that I have, and I just grab something beautiful from like Peanut Bausch, something super dramatic and beautiful, something gorgeous where the dancer's like dancing, on stage next to a real boulder, while it's raining on stage. And I put that piece on, and you just see them go like, oh my gosh. And you see right away the wheels turning, like, and they look at me and they're like a little kid that's like, just like, I'm going to be able to do that. And it's like, yes, I promise you, you're going to be able to make music like this, but even better. You're going to be so surprised what each of you make, right? The first time you hear each other's projects, you're just going to be blown out of the water. Just trust me while I teach you what a transport is and like, and what a simpler is,
Right. That is remarkable. And it is, man, I want to come and sit in on a class sometime just to watch this happen, because it sounds magical, man. It really does.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a super huge compliment coming from you. And when I was reaching out to you, I was really nervous because I did a demonstration. I got to do a 2 lecture demonstration at Loop last year in LA. Mm-hmm. And when I started listening to your podcast, I heard that you were there. And I was like, oh no, did he happen to like come to one of my things? And I didn't know he was there. And I really quickly, I'm like, Seraphin, give me a picture of Darwin quick. I got to see before I email this guy, because I don't want to anyway. But that was the thing. Like, I mentioned earlier that I had gone up for my Ableton certification and failed, right? Yeah. The first time. And when my other buddy, Dave Hallel at Ableton, came to see me play a dance class for the first time, he was like, whoa, this guy's a ninja at live. Like, this is incredible. Like, he's like, you got to be certified right away. Like, let's get this going. And I failed miserably. I think it was Dennis DeSantis on one phone call, and then the other was Dennis Fischer from Germany on the other. So the two, like, it's like, being examined on Max by you. Yeah, totally scary. And I just crumbled. I mean, I think they asked like a stupid question, like, like, what's the difference between analog and operator? And I was like, I had no clue what to tell them, because I didn't know live super well, but I did know how to play dance classes really well, and I knew how to manipulate and manage tons of different textures at the same time from playing dance class at once. And so, that's what, when they asked me like to present at Loop, I really wanted to show the template that I use, that it's not, I mean, I've since learned the manual inside and out, the Ableton manual. And so I'm ready for I told Dennis Fischer when I met him, like, I'm coming for you, buddy. Coming for you the next time I get a chance to take that certification.
The crosshairs are on you. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And he said it in his normal, like, short 2-word sentence. He's like, bring it,
Right, yeah, exactly.
But I really wanted to show people the way I use the template in a very different way, to be able to play any BPM, any meter, and anything that's thrown at me from a dance teacher. And what was important for me was to bring dancers, So I had two LA-based dancers that were graduates from the University of Utah here, and they were living in LA, and they presented with me. And the musicians in there were just like blown away. And I've gotten so much feedback from that and follow-up from that of just like, how can we start working with music,
That's so
working with
cool.
dancers? And
Yeah.
I just highly encourage it, as you know, what a rich inspirational field
It's
that
something
is.
else. Well, Michael, unfortunately, our time is up, and I feel like we just got started with our conversation, but it's going to be time for me to let you go. But before we do, for people who want to check out these like roughly 1.5 million songs you've already released, where's a good place for people to kind of light in on your work?
Well, I'm on Instagram, Sound for Movement, and I'm on Spotify under Michael Wall. And on my website, soundformovement.com, you can find all of my albums. So I'm on all the major streaming services, and not so much on Facebook so much. I have to stay on it because of the Ableton user groups.
Right.
But Instagram's a great way to keep in touch. And I'm starting a new project that I'm very excited with my buddy Oliver and my buddy Austin, where we're embracing the clock, right? So we're integrating CV tools with live, with I just got an ES8 and a modular system, and we're trying to just run 3 laptops and really kind of go down that road. A lot of it was inspired from you and your podcast, getting into modular music. And so I'm grateful, for all the interviews you did with the guy from Qubit, because the first module I got was a Nebula.
Oh, nice.
It's like a weird one to start with, but
oh no,
boy.
That's an awesome one to start with, I think.
Yeah. So I'll have we're working hard on some really fantastic music, and that group is Light User, and that'll be coming up soon. So
that sounds fantastic. Well, man, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this chat. It was awe-inspiring to hear what you're doing and hear what you're bringing to the game. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Darwin. It was an honor and a privilege to be on the podcast. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, I'll let you go. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Now, wasn't that just unbelievable? My God, Michael is rocking it out there. I can't wait to get out to Salt Lake so I can just kind of see some of this in action. Well, I want to thank everybody out there for continuing to listen and be so supportive of me and of the podcast. I want to thank all the different people that have been getting interviews lately. We've got a really nice backlog of information that we're going to be able to share. And I want to thank especially some of the people that have helped get the word out on the podcast, most specifically folks in Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter that have been sharing all the stuff, people over in YouTube who've been sharing and helping get some subscribers, and realistically, everybody out there that just says to their friends, hey, check it out. Art plus music plus technology. It's kind of cool. I appreciate that. It's really brought us a great listenership. Thank you so much. With that, I'm going to let you go. Have a great one, and I'll see you next week. Bye.